Okay, so today we are talking about Santa Claus. And listen, the cute, cozy Santa you grew up with, the jolly grandpa who brings gifts, loves cookies, and sneak into your house like it's no big deal. Yeah, that version is basically the PR makeover of the century. Because the real origins of Santa are wild. Before he was the king of Christmas, he was a 4th century bishop who, accordingly to later stories, confronted corrupt officials, saved innocent people from execution, helped the poor in secret, and appears in medieval legends where he resurrects 3 murdered children that had been hidden in a barrel. And that's just the Christian side of the story. Long before that, European pagans had winter gods who flew across the night sky, brought gifts or punishments, and rode animals with way too many legs. Think Odin, but with more attitude and fewer Christmas jingles. Then the Dutch added their version. The English added theirs, Americans added some marketing, and somehow all these pieces collided into the Santa we know today. So grab a drink, get comfy, because this is the true, fact-checked, not-so-cute history of Santa Claus. And honestly, it's way more interesting than anything in a Christmas movie. So let's start with the man himself, Saint Nicholas of Myra. Real person, real bishop, lived in the 3rd and 4th century in what is now Turkey. And listen, this man was not the soft, cozy grandpa we see on wrapping paper. He was intense, like I'm going to stand up to corrupt officials, stop wrongful executions, and terrify murderers with my presence intense. One of the oldest stories about him goes like this. 3 innocent men were about to be executed because corrupt officials had been bribed to condemn them. Nicholas shows up at the execution, steps in, and literally grabs the executioner's sword. Then he calls out everyone involved until the truth comes out and the men are saved. Not the vibe of a man who just wants milk and cookies. This is more, don't mess with me, I see everything energy. Okay, now we get darker. There's a medieval legend that becomes super popular in Europe. A butcher, or innkeeper, depending on the version, murders 3 boys during a famine, chops them up, and hides them in a barrel of salt to sell as meat. St. Nicholas comes into the shop, immediately senses something is wrong, prays, and the boys are restored to life. Is this story historically verifiable? No. Is it a documented part of his medieval cult and art for centuries? Absolutely yes. And it's one of the key reasons he became the patron saint of children. Is it a cheerful story? Absolutely not. Is it a part of the official Santa origin? Yes. Which is insane when you compare it to the man who now hands out PlayStations. Then there's the actual sweet one. A poor father was so desperate he considered selling his daughters into slavery or prostitution. Nicholas heard about it, and at night he secretly dropped bags of gold into the man's house so the girls should have dowries and marry instead. In some later versions, the gold lands in stockings or shoes drying by the fire. And boom! Stockings as a gift tradition are born. Not magic, not elves, just a bishop trying to save girls from a nightmare life. Saint Nicholas was not cute back then. When medieval artists painted him, he wasn't smiling. He had a stern face, a long bishop's beard, a big book of sense, serious don't test me energy. He rewarded the good, yes, but he absolutely showed up to punish and correct. So already we have a character who protects children, scares corrupt adults, resurrects the dead in legend, drops gold into windows, and has a reputation that spreads across Europe. You can see how this guy turned into a mythic figure. But this is where the things get even more interesting, because while the Christian world was building up St. Nicholas, the pagans already had their own wintertime visitors. So while St. Nicholas was doing the bishop things in the Mediterranean, the north of Europe was already rolling with its own winter legends. And these were not gentle, rosy-cheeked visitors either. Let's talk about Odin. Yes, that Odin. One-eyed god of war, magic, wisdom, poetry, the whole package. But in winter, later folklore and interpretations connect Odin to specific seasonal roles. In Germanic and Scandinavian tradition around Yule, there are stories of Odin riding across the night sky with a long beard, sometimes visiting homes, associated with blessings, protection, and occasionally gifts. He doesn't ride in sleigh though. He rides his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, who can travel through the air. 8 legs. If that doesn't foreshadow reindeer, I don't know what does. In some later folk traditions, people say children would have left boots with straw or trees for Sleipnir, and Odin would reward them by leaving small gifts in return. Sound familiar? Yeah, exactly. Different religion, different vibe, but the same basic winter ritual. Leaving something out, receiving something back. Now, there's the part I would not want visiting my house. In a lot of later Germanic folklore, there's the thing called the wild hunt. It's like a supernatural storm across the sky made of ghosts, spirits, hunting dogs, and sometimes doomed souls. In many versions, the hunt is led by Odin or a similar powerful figure. People were warned, if you are outside and the hunt passes by, you could get bad luck or be swept away with them. So basically, Odin has a blessings and gifts side and a ghost tornado in the sky side. Love that for him. Winter celebrations back then weren't warm and cozy. Life was harsh, food was limited, you were literally hoping the sun would come back and crops wouldn't fail. So, winter rituals included big feasts, bonfires, sacrifices, storytelling, invoking protection from dangerous spirits. This is the world where winter visitors lived. Serious, powerful beings who can help you survive or punish you if you misbehaved. So now in Europe we've got a saintly protector bishop, a powerful winter god, both visiting at night, both tied to reward and punishment, both rocking legendary beards. Naturally, over centuries these threads start to blend. And that brings us to the next major shift, because while Europe was busy mixing folklore, another part of the world was about to remix everything into what we now call Santa Claus. So now that we have unpacked Europe's chaotic winter folklore, Saint Nicholas on one side, Odin on the other, a bunch of terrifying gift gifters in between. Let's jump to the part where America basically said, "Hold my cocoa, we are going to rebuild this man from scratch." This is where the Santa we recognize today finally starts to take shape. And honestly, it's less ancient magical being and more a crew project created by authors, illustrators, and one guy who wrote a trolley history book. Let's start with that guy. The first big nudge came from Washington Irving, a writer you probably know from Sleepy Hollow. But before he made Headless Horseman iconic, he wrote a satirical history of New York and casually mentioned that Dutch settlers brought their Santa Claus tradition to America. It might have been partly tongue-in-cheek, but Americans at the time were like, "Oh, Santa? Love him, let's do that." That tiny mention helped spark a wave of interest in this winter gift bringer in New York. Then a few decades later came the real game changer. Clement Clarke Moore's 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, better known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. This poem is basically the blueprint for modern Santa. Moore gives us the 8 reindeer, their names, the sleigh, the chimney entrance, stockings hung by the fire, the bowl full of Jelly Belly, the twinkly jolly personality. So much of what we picture comes from this one poem. Like this man was a Hebrew professor writing a Christmas poem and accidentally became one of the fathers of American folklore. Even then, people still didn't fully picture Santa the same way. Enter Thomas Nast, political cartoonist for Harper's Weekly in mid-1800s, who basically said, "Okay, I'm going to draw this guy over and over until everyone sees him the same way." And he did. Nast gave Santa the mostly red fur-trimmed suit, the North Pole home, the toy workshop, the elves, Mrs. Claus, the naughty or nice list, and the piles of letters from children. Basically, he creates the Santa cinematic universe. And by the way, yes, you have probably heard that Coca Cola invented Santa's red suit. No, they didn't. We will get into that properly later. So, by the late 1800s, America has pretty much assembled the Santa we know today. And then the 20th century comes along and piles even more on top. Movies, animated specials, TV commercials, children's books, all layering new explanations for how the sleigh flies, how Santa ages or doesn't, how the letters get answered, how a man survives cookies from millions of households. Every generation adds a little more. Santa is basically one giant folklore snowball rolling through the time, picking up new ideas and getting bigger and shinier every year. But before we talk Coca-Cola and modern Santa, we have to go back a bit. Because between St. Nicholas and Shopping Mall Santa, there was a very dramatic chapter called "The Reformation Tried to Cancel St. Nick." Alright, we are rewinding to the 1500s. The church is in chaos, people are calling out corruption, and saints are suddenly not that popular in some parts of Europe. This is the Protestant Reformation, and it almost kills St. Nicholas's gig as the official gift bringer. Some Protestant reformers, including Martin Luther, were very over the idea of people focusing on saints instead of Christ. So in a lot of speaking German areas, they push a new figure, Christkind or Christkindl, literally Christ child. But here's the twist. Despite the name, Christkindl is usually not shown as a literal baby Jesus. In later descriptions and traditions, Christkindl is often a young, almost angelic figure, usually with blonde hair, dressed in white and gold, sometimes with a crown or halo, and played by a girl or young woman in Christmas plays and parades. So officially, gifts are now from Christ, not from a saint. Visually, it's like a glowing Christmas angel sneaking into your house with presents. They also shift a lot of gift giving from December the 6th, the St. Nicholas Day, to Christmas Eve, to line it up more closely with the celebration of Christ's birth. So on paper, Nicholas is out, Christkindl is in. In reality, the people kind of kept both ideas floating around. Meanwhile, up in the Netherlands, people basically said, okay, you can theologically complain about saints all you want. We are still doing Sinterklaas. They kept their St. Nicholas traditions alive as folklore. Sinterklaas looks like a bishop with red robes and mitre, rides a white horse, arrives by ship from Spain in many versions, visits homes around December the 5th or 6th, and leaves gifts in shoes or stockings left out by children. The framing shifts a bit. Less we are worshipping a saint, more this is our traditional winter figure. But functionally, that's still St. Nicholas showing up with presents. Now, let's talk about Belsnickel. If Santa is the friendly grandpa, Belsnickel is the chaotic uncle who lives in the woods and shows up once a year to judge your life. In parts of Germany and later among Pennsylvania Dutch communities, people tell stories about Belsnickel. He wears ragged, fur-covered clothes, sometimes has a mask or a dirty face, carries a switch or a bundle of sticks, but also has pockets full of nuts, sweets and small gifts. He visits shortly before Christmas, knocks on doors and tests children. Children have to recite prayers, answer questions or show good behavior. If they do well, he scatters treats on the floor. If they don't, they might get smacked with the switch or seriously scared. So yeah, this is not Hallmark Channel Christmas. Belsnickel's whole job is reward the respectful, scare the disrespectful. And the judge and punish energy is something Santa's lore quietly keeps. Then there's Zwarte Piet, or Black Peter, from the Dutch Sinterklaas tradition. Historically, he is described as the assistant or helper of Sinterklaas, dressed in colorful Renaissance clothing, carrying a bag of sweets, and often shown with a very dark face and curly hair. Older versions of the story give him a scarier role too. He can carry a rod or a switch. He may symbolically put naughty children in the sack. He is one of the who does the dirty work while Sinterklaas stayed dignified. In the 19th and 20th centuries, he was very often portrayed in full blackface makeup, which is why in recent decades the tradition has become hugely controversial. A lot of communities in the Netherlands and Belgium have been changing the character, switching to suit smudge faces instead of blackface or redesigning Pete entirely. From our perspective today, the important part is this. Santa's extended family of winter figures has always included someone who gives and someone who punishes. Saint Nicholas and his miracles, Belsnickel and his switch, Sinterklaas and his helper who might drag you away in a sack. All of that sits in the background of our modern naughty or nice Santa. How America finished building Santa? We already did a quick version, but now that we know about Christkind, Sinterklaas, Belsnickel and friends, let's zoom in on how all of that turns into one guy at a mall. Because the modern Santa is not just Saint Nicholas moved to the North Pole. He is like a folklore smoothie. A shot of Saint Nicholas, a splash of Odin, a dash of Father Christmas, shaken with immigrant traditions and served with a candy cane. In England, there was another character in the mix, Father Christmas. From the 1600s onward, he shows up in plays and pamphlets as an old man, associated with feasting, drinking, games, basically the personification of the Christmas season. He was not originally a children's gift giver. He was more like the spirit of let's eat and party. In some depictions, he is called Old Christmas or Old Father Christmas, wearing fur-trimmed robes, sometimes a wreath of holly, and he is tied to adult revelry, not secret presents in the night. Later in Victorian era, as Christmas becomes more family-centered and child-focused, Father Christmas slowly merges with the child gift-bringer role. So by the time Santa fully forms, Father Christmas and Santa are basically the same guy in English-speaking countries, just different names and vibes mashed together. Before Clement Clarke Moore's big poem in 1823, there's an earlier one in 1821 called Old Santa Claus with Much Delight. This little booklet already shows a winter gift-bringer named Santa Claus, traveling in a sleigh pulled by a reindeer, arriving on Christmas Eve wearing a red coat. So the sleigh, reindeer and Christmas Eve arrival are already circulating in American kids' books before Moore ever published his poem. Then a visit from St. Nicholas hits in 1823 and just obliterates all competition. Moore's Santa has 8 reindeers with names, arrives on Christmas Eve night, lands on the roof, comes down the chimney, sees the stockings hung by the fire, is chubby and plump, has a belly that shakes like a bowl full of jelly, has cheeks like roses and a nose like a cherry. This poem cements so many details that a later artist just ran with. In the mid to late 1800s, Thomas Nast turned this poetic description into a full visual mythos. In his illustration, Santa lives at the North Pole, has a toy workshop, reads letters from children, keeps a naughty and nice list, and is sometimes shown looking at the world through a telescope, and is surrounded by elves and later Mrs. Claus. By the end of the 19th century, thanks to Moore and Nast and a whole wave of imitators, the Santa template is basically done. He is a composite of St. Nicholas's generosity and bishop vibes, Odin like sky traveling, medieval reward-punish logic, Sinterklaas's horses and chimneys and December timing, Father Christmas's feasting and jolliness, and American storytelling and marketing energy. Now he just needs one more thing, to become a global brand. And that's where Coca Cola walks in. You have probably heard this one. Actually, Coca Cola invented Santa. They made him red to match their logo. This is one of those fun facts that is not a fact. Here's what's true. Santa was already being drawn in red fur-trim outfits in the 1800s. Old Santa Claus with much delight had a red coat in 1821. Thomas Nast drew Santa in various colors, but red was one of them and became more common over time. So Red Santa existed long before Coke touched him. What Coca-Cola did do, starting in 1931, was hire artist Haddon Sundblom to paint Santa for their holiday advertisements. His version is warm, extremely jolly, very human and grandpa-like, with a bright red suit, white fur trim, shiny belt and boots. These images ran in magazines, posters and store displays for decades. So no, Coca-Cola did not invent Santa or his red suit, but they absolutely helped standardize and spread that exact look around the world. Basically, they took a character built by centuries of folklore and helped turn him into the face of commercial Christmas. Okay, now we are getting into the part that feels the most dark for modern parents. Because Santa is not just a man who shows up with free stuff. He is also a story used to monitor children's behavior, like a festive little NSA in red coat. The idea that Santa keeps a list, one for good kids and one for bad, shows up in the 1800s and gets super popular through the poems, stories, and especially Thomas Nast's art. Some illustrations literally show Santa reading letters labeled good and bad children, checking names of lists, watching people through a telescope, so visually Santa is not just a visitor, he is a judge. Then in 1934 we get a song Santa Claus is Coming to Town, which hardcodes that idea into everyone's brain. He's making a list and checking it twice, gonna find out who's naughty and nice. He sees you when you are sleeping, he knows when you are awake, he knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. If you take away the melody and just read that, it's kind of horrifying. This is not just God sees you in a spiritual sense. This is literally magical old man monitors your behavior and your Christmas presents are conditional. Parents then weaponize that story. Santa is watching. You won't get presents if you keep doing that. This is a very old folklore logic dressed up in a red suit. Because historically, winter visitors have always had this structure. St. Nicholas saving some and punishing others in legends. Belsnickel rewarding or whipping. Sinterklaas and Zwarte rewarding or threatening. Odin's wild hunt bringing either blessing or danger. Santa is just the modern cozy version of a very ancient dynamic. Someone powerful is watching you. Your actions are being evaluated. Rewards are not guaranteed. We have turned cosmic fear of winter, hunger and spirits into a man with a gift list and a cookie habit. But the emotional skeleton underneath? Still the same. So let's unpack what we actually have when we say Santa Claus. Behind the mall and the Coca-Cola Santa and the movie Santa, there's a 4th century bishop who defended the innocent, secretly funded dowries and show up in dark medieval miracle stories. Norse myth and later folklore of one-eyed god flying across the winter sky, sometimes blessing, sometimes terrifying. Medieval Europe's obsession with gift-bringers who could save you or punish you. A Reformation-era attempt to replace saints with Christkind that kind of sort of worked, but not really. Dutch stubbornness that kept Sinterklaas alive with horses, chimneys, and Spanish ships. German and Pennsylvania traditions of Belsnickel, the fur-clad judge with a switch and sweets. Santa Claus's controversial helper, Zwartupid, who reveals how folklore can also carry prejudice and power. English Father Christmas, who started as the spirit of adult feasting and slowly fused with the children's gift bringer. American writers and artists who basically did a massive group project and gave us reindeer, sleighs, chimneys, the North Pole, and the whole aesthetic package. And finally, 20th century advertising that polished him into the global icon we know today. Is Santa still magical? Honestly, yes. But he's also a mirror. He reflects what different cultures needed from winter. Protection, justice, hope, control, comfort, and eventually shopping. So the next time you see Santa's face on a map or a billboard or in a movie, just remember, somewhere behind that jolly smile is a stern bishop grabbing a sword from an executioner, a god leading a ghostly storm in the sky, a fur-wrapped man knocking on doors with a switch in hand, and a very long list with a lot of names on it. Cute. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments, did you grow up with the nice cozy Santa, or did your family have some darker versions like St. Nicholas Day, Belsnickel, Krampus, or Santa is watching you threads? I want to hear your stories. Hit like if you learned something new, subscribe if you want more dark origins of wholesome traditions, and share this with the one friend who still thinks Coca Cola invented Santa so we can ruin that myth together. Until next time, be kind, stay curious, and maybe don't think too hard about the fact that the man who knows when you are sleeping is coming to your house at night.